So, autoimmune disease, what is it? So, it seems like every other person has an autoimmune disease, whether it's Hashimoto's or lupus or multiple sclerosis or Raynaud's or all sorts of different conditions, depending on what tissue is involved. So, the immune system is not supposed to attack our own bodies, it's supposed to attack foreign things. So, when your immune system is thinking that your body is foreign and it's attacking itself, that's what autoimmune disease is. So, what is the trigger? So, there are many, many triggers. It can be genetic. So, you could have your mom and your aunt and your grandma or your sister or somebody. We could all have lupus, or we could all have rheumatoid arthritis, or we could all have Hashimoto's. Everyone has a thyroid problem. So, these are important things to try to figure out, like, who has it and is it genetic for you? Now, just because you have the genetic tendency doesn't mean you have to get it. So, this means we have to be a little bit more savvy about what's happening with our body and not triggering this autoimmune disease. So, first things first, you can actually get a blood test and find out if you're positive ANA. That would go toward a lot of different autoimmune diseases like lupus and scleroderma and all sorts of diseases that go along with positive ANA. It could be positive for thyroglobulin antibodies or the thyroid peroxidase antibodies, which is for Hashimoto's. It could be a positive rheumatoid arthritis factor, which would be rheumatoid arthritis. There's so many autoimmune diseases, and there's ways that you can do a real deep dive in testing multiple tissues at the same time through a company called Cyrex, which is something that I do with my patients. So if you have a positive ANA, or if you know you have a thyroid issue and you think it's autoimmune, it's time to dive a little deeper and try to figure out if it is. Because if it is, then we need to think about what was the root cause of your trigger? Why did it trigger for you? So let's say most of my patients that have autoimmune disease also have reactions to gluten and dairy. Now, that's because the tissue of our body, say our thyroid, that structure, protein structure of our tissue, is so molecularly similar to the structure of the protein of casein and gluten that you have this thing called cross reactivity. So, if you are exposed to gluten and your immune system is revved up about gluten or dairy, it can also rev up an attack toward your thyroid or your joints or your soft tissue, depending on what's being attacked. So, gluten and dairy can be triggers. That's number one. Now, number two, it can be something that's a poison or a toxin, or we could have issues with plastics. These new things that have been exposed to our bodies in the past 100 years, like rat poison, like sprays for ants, like mosquito sprays, and pesticides and herbicides that we've been exposed to, or if you've been exposed to a lot of plastics or you drink out of a plastic water bottle every day, those types of things can be toxic to our body or can just disrupt the body. We can actually have microplastics get attached to some tissues of our body so that our body doesn't even recognize it as self. So that can be confusing to the body, and the body can say, the immune system can say, this doesn't look like me, so I'm going to attack it and get rid of it, which it could just be because you're exposed to microplastics, maybe. So that's another trigger. Other triggers, people that just don't sleep on a regular basis, that can be a big trigger. So if you have autoimmunity, sleep is really important. Now, if you are going through a hormone transition, say puberty, say pregnancy, or menopause, that can be a time that you can have an autoimmune flare up where all of a sudden you didn't think you had an autoimmune condition, but all of a sudden now you do. That's pretty common, actually. So that's something to kind of look out for. Like, gosh, when after you're pregnant or after you go into menopause, it's a great time to look at some autoimmune markers on labs and see if that's something that's triggered for you, especially if you're having symptoms. Now, if you feel like you are having these sort of exhaustion and joint pain, or you know you have autoimmune disease, it's important that you get to the bottom of what your trigger is. And this is what I do in my practice. I specialize in what I'm calling the autoimmune reset. And it's a 12-week program where I put people through 12 weeks of just education and understanding about what it is that's happening with our bodies and what it could be with the trigger of this and why is this happening and what do I do about it to try to calm it down. I personally have an autoimmune disease. I have an ANA marker that could go toward lupus. So I'm very careful about what happens with me and what my body's exposed to, how much sleep I get, and the foods that I get exposed to, and the chemicals I get exposed to. And I have all sorts of reasons to do all this because I want to preserve my own tissue, because I do have aunts and I have a mom and I have all sorts of people in my family tree that have had lupus or autoimmune diseases and have died from that. So I'm very motivated to try to keep myself safe and to keep you safe too. So I'm going to put my link below if you feel like you need some help, if you want some guidance, if you want someone to help you figure out what you're doing and why and how to get there. Um, Ping me. You can do a little Calendly link and make an appointment with me, and we can figure it out. So bring your labs. Let's look at them. Let's run some labs. Let's figure it out. But really, I want to empower you to figure out your root cause and how to calm your system down so that you can live a full life without being so worried about being disabled and having destruction of your nerves or your joints or your brain or your thyroid or whatever tissue it is, because it's scary. But we can take back control and we can help you figure out your root cause too.